the 10 most promiscuous female R&B legends in the music industry. Welcome back to Legends of Black Excellence. Today we're pulling the curtain back on a side of R&B history that was whispered about in tour buses, dressing rooms, and boardrooms, but rarely told in daylight. Not to glorify scandal and not to recycle rumors, but to ask a sharper question: why were black women celebrated for singing passion, yet condemned for having real lives outside the mic? Some stories are verified, others are mythology, and the industry blurred them on purpose. Stay to the final name, because the last one will challenge everything before it. Subscribe now, and tell me in one word: truth or stereotype? Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston remains one of the most consequential vocal artists in American popular music, and any discussion of her romantic reputation has to start with the reality of how intensely her life was policed, packaged, and then sensationalized. Born in Newark in 1963 into a gospel-steeped family, she entered show business already surrounded by expectation. Her mother, Cissy Houston, was a respected singer, and cousins, Dionne Warwick and Dee Dee Warwick, were already famous. From the jump, Whitney's image was designed to be immaculate, America's sweetheart with a church voice and crossover shine. That framing mattered because the more flawless the public mask, the more ravenous the rumor mill became whenever she showed human complexity. Her early adult years included a deep bond with Robin Crawford, her close friend and creative confidant. Robin later described their relationship as romantic in its earliest phase, and also described the pressure Whitney faced once her career surged. Whether one labels that youthful love private or unfinished, it's clear that it became part of the backstage story people used to interpret every later choice Whitney made. As her fame expanded in the mid-1980s, she was linked in tabloids to athletes and entertainers, but most of those headlines were never confirmed by Whitney herself. Then came Bobby Brown. They met in 1989, married in 1992, and their union became a cultural storm to fans. It looked like chemistry and rebellion. To executives, it looked like risk. To gossip outlets, it was an endless headline engine. Their marriage produced one child, Bobby Christina, and lasted amid widely reported volatility until their separation in 2006 and divorce in 2007. There were documented fights, mutual jealousy, and substance abuse on both sides. But the leap from chaotic marriage to serial affairs is mostly tabloid imagination. Stories of secret hotel trysts and rotating lovers circulated for decades, yet they live in the realm of allegation, not verifiable record. Halfway through all of this sits the real question: how much of Whitney's love life do we truly know, and how much was written for us by people selling scandal? That tension is essential to understanding why she is repeatedly placed in lists like the one you're remaking. The industry rewarded intimacy in her music while punishing it in her humanity. If a backstage friendship looked too close, it was rebranded as a conspiracy. If a marriage cracked in public, it was reframed as proof of moral chaos. The same culture that demanded she sing heartbreak also demanded she be endlessly accused of creating it. What is certain is that Whitney often searched for love in environments that were unsafe for her emotionally and chemically. The late 1990s and early 2000s show a clear arc of exhaustion, missed performances, strained interviews, and a visible fight to keep her career afloat while addiction tightened its grip. Friends and collaborators have spoken about how fame isolated her, how trust became difficult, and how affection, romantic or otherwise, was frequently tangled with control. That isn't promiscuity, it's pain. Whitney died in 2012 at age 48, leaving behind a catalog that still defines vocal excellence. Her story is not a cautionary tale about too many lovers. It is a story about a woman whose emotional life was devoured by celebrity, whose private bonds were turned into public weapons, and whose legacy deserves honesty over sensationalism. If your audience remembers anything, let it be this: Whitney's greatest romance was always with the music, and that love changed the world. Chaka Khan. Chaka Khan's legend was never built on polish or restraint. It was forged in heat swagger and a voice that could slice through any mix, like brass through velvet. Born Yvette Marie Stevens in Chicago in 1953, she came up in a city where Soul Street politics and black consciousness were part of daily air. Before fame, she was involved in community activism and the Black Panther Party's local orbit, a detail that helps explain her lifelong refusal to be anyone's safe star. When she joined Rufus in the early 1970s, the band had grit, but her arrival gave it lightning. By 1974, Tell Me Something Good and her roaring delivery made her impossible to ignore, an artist who sounded like she was both celebrating and warning you at once. Her personal life, like her music, carried intensity. What is documented is that she married bassist Hassan Khan when she was very young. The marriage ended, and she later described that era as chaotic, fueled partly by drug dependency. She has never framed herself as a saint, but she has been direct about the cost of addiction. Neglected responsibilities, fractured trust, and relationships she couldn't protect because she wasn't protecting herself. That honesty matters because so many stories about her love life online are amplified as folklore rather than record. The loudest claims overlapping partners inside Rufus backstage rivalries, sparked by jealousy, supposed secret entanglements with major stars, float around her name, largely because her magnetism made people want a dramatic narrative. The famous name link-ups are especially slippery territory. Chaka and Prince clearly shared artistic chemistry. He admired her voice, she admired his audacity, and their mutual respect is etched into sessions covers and collaborations. But romance between them has never been confirmed by either side. Similarly, she has publicly rejected the idea that she slept with Rick James, even while acknowledging that their circles overlapped in the same wild, drug-soaked late 70s and early 80s nightlife. In other words, the creative proximity is factual. The bedroom conclusions are not. Treating those leaps as truth does a disservice to how real her documented struggles already were. What makes Chaka's story compelling without embellishment is the arc of survival. During the late 1970s, she wrestled heavily with cocaine and alcohol. She has said addiction distorted her temperament. Quick attachments, quick explosions, and fallout that followed her into studios and homes. In later years, she entered recovery multiple times, regained custody of her life, and re-centered on motherhood and craft. She has 2 children, and she's spoken about the tug-of-war between touring demands and the kind of stability a family needs. That conflict, not some invented scoreboard of partners, is the real human drama beneath her diva reputation. Professionally, she never stopped evolving. The solo breakthrough, I'm Every Woman, 1978, turned her into a global symbol of empowerment, and the duet On My Own with Luther Vandross. 1986 proved she could dominate both funk fire and adult contemporary elegance. Her career spans 5 decades, 10 Grammys, and influence that runs through Mary J. Blige, Erykah Badu, Beyoncé, and countless others. The through line is not excess. It's voltage, emotional, vocal, and personal. If people still whisper about her private world, it's because Chaka Khan has always lived like she sings all the way out on the edge, where the truth is messy, but the artistry is undeniable. Tina Turner. Tina Turner's life reads less like celebrity gossip and more like a hard-won American odyssey, one that began in Nutbush, Tennessee in 1939 and ended with her name synonymous with rebirth. Long before stadium lights and global tours, Anna Mae Bullock grew up in a segregated South where music was refuge and escape route. She moved to St. Louis as a teenager, sang in local clubs, and met guitarist Ike Turner in the late 1950s. Their partnership launched her into national recognition, but it also locked her into one of the most documented cycles of abuse in entertainment history. Tina later described years of physical violence, psychological control, and financial manipulation. This is not rumor. It is a fact supported by her own memoirs and multiple interviews. In July 1976, after a brutal incident during a tour drive, she fled with only a few cents and a gas station credit card. The divorce settlement left her mainly with her stage name, a choice she made deliberately because that name was her future. The press, however, often tried to turn her post-escape years into something lurid reckless, addicted to men out of control. Yet the credible record shows a woman scrambling to survive, not a woman chasing scandal. She performed wherever she could. TV variety shows, small venues, anything that kept her afloat while clearing debts. Ike had left in her name. Financial desperation, not romantic excess, defined that chapter. When someone walks out of a cage after 16 years, isn't it natural that the world mistakes breathing for misbehavior? Yes, Tina dated after Ike. She never denied wanting tenderness after living in terror. But the most sensational stories, secret hotel lineups, endless affairs with bandmates, shadowy lovers in every city were never verified by reliable sources. What is verifiable is that she was determined to reclaim joy on her own terms. She explored Buddhism in the 1970s, chanting as a daily grounding practice, and credited that discipline with sharpening her resolve. That spiritual anchor is important because it explains how she could rebuild an entire career in her 40s, an age when the industry typically discards women. Her comeback wasn't a lucky break, it was an engineered return. The breakthrough came with Private Dancer in 1984. At 44, Tina didn't just reappear, she detonated. The album sold millions, produced chart-dominating singles, and turned her into a global rock-soul hybrid icon. The world saw leather high heels and explosive choreography. Beneath it was a survivor using performance as liberation. Her concerts became a declaration no one owned her anymore. Over the next decade, she toured relentlessly, set attendance records, and won major awards, including multiple Grammys and eventual Rock and Roll Hall of Fame recognition first, with Ike later as a solo artist. In her private world, stability arrived through Erwin Bach, a German music executive she met in 1985. Their partnership lasted nearly 3 decades before they married in 2013. Tina spoke of that relationship not as drama, but as peace, healthier love after years of trauma. She moved to Switzerland, stepped away from constant touring, and chose quiet on purpose. Even in later years, when she faced serious health challenges, her public narrative remained one of resilience rather than spectacle. So if you're remaking a story tied to a provocative headline, Tina's case demands clarity. Her legend isn't built on a tally of partners. It's built on escape endurance and reinvention. The truth is already gripping. No embellishment needed. Millie Jackson. Millie Jackson came into soul music like a slammed door in a quiet house, sudden, loud, and impossible to pretend you didn't hear. Raised in rural Georgia and sharpened by the club circuit, she learned early that survival in show business didn't favor the timid. When her records began reaching wider audiences in the early 1970s, she wasn't marketed as a sweet ingenue or a polished diva. Instead, she stepped forward as the woman who said what other singers only hinted at. Her voice could melt into velvet on a slow ballad, then flip into a cutting monologue that felt like a late-night phone call with your most brutally honest friend. That mixed tender singing plus no-filter talk became her signature and turned her concerts into adult theater, equal parts comedy, confession, and confrontation. What made Millie controversial wasn't a provable string of affairs. It was the way she refused to perform innocence. Her concept albums, Caught Up and Still Caught Up, were built like soap operas on vinyl, telling stories of cheating, temptation, and the emotional wreckage that follows. She didn't present adultery as glamorous, she presented it as human, messy, and painfully common. And because she did it without shame, critics often treated the characters in her songs as if they were literal autobiographies. That leap is where much of her Promiscuous label comes from. In truth, Millie used narrative voices the way a great novelist does to expose hypocrisy, to show how desire can be both thrilling and destructive, and to highlight how society forgives men for hunger while punishing women for the same appetite. Away from the microphones, Millie kept her private world guarded. The public facts are straightforward: she is a mother, and her romantic history was never displayed as a publicity tool. Unlike many peers who fed magazines with carefully staged couple moments, Millie rarely offered the press anything to chew on. That silence didn't stop chatter. It strengthened it. Any artist who sings so directly about sex becomes an easy target for people who want the fantasy of a real-life scandal to match the lyrics. But there is a clear difference between verified biography and the mythology that grows around a fearless stage persona. Her boldness also made her an outlier in a conservative era. Radio stations edited her work or avoided it. Television bookings were cautious. Reviewers called her vulgar while quietly loving her honesty. Yet audiences, especially grown listeners, who recognized their own complicated histories in her songs, kept showing up. Millie became a voice for people who had lived through long marriages, betrayals, reconciliations, and the daily negotiations of love. She was not selling prettiness. She was selling recognition. That's why her performances felt cathartic. She gave people permission to laugh at heartbreak, to admit desire, and to stop pretending that romance is always clean. Millie Jackson's real importance then isn't in any uncountable list of lovers. It's in what she made possible. She pushed R&B's boundaries for women, carving space for later artists to speak plainly about pleasure, disappointment, and power. The industry tried to squeeze her into a scandal headline. Her work outlived that impulse. What remains is a daring adult storyteller who turned taboo into art and turned honesty into her greatest form of seduction. Mary J. Blige. Mary J. Blige rose out of Yonkers with a sound that felt like a diary sung through a thunderstorm. Born in 1971, she grew up between instability and grit, carrying childhood scars that later became the emotional engine of her music. When she arrived at Uptown Records at the start of the 1990s, she wasn't polished. She was raw, hungry, and heartbreak ready. That honesty helped spark a revolution in R&B, one that braided hip-hop attitude with soul vulnerability. What's the 411 1992 and My Life 1994 didn't just sell records. They gave voice to women who had been told to swallow their pain quietly. Mary's gift was turning survival into rhythm. Because her songs were so intimate, the public constantly tried to map her private world onto them. The most widely acknowledged relationship of her early fame was with Casey Haley of Jodeci. Their bond unfolding through the mid-90s was passionate and volatile, and Mary has discussed how the relationship coincided with her darkest years of substance dependence. The heartbreak in tracks like Not Gone Cry and I'm Going Down wasn't a marketing trick. It reflected a real season of chaos, insecurity, and longing for stability. The relationship eventually ended, leaving her to rebuild herself while staying under the glare of a culture that rarely allows wounded women to heal in peace. Have you ever loved someone so fiercely that you couldn't tell where devotion ended and damage began? As Mary's career expanded, so did the narratives people attached to her. Studios, tours, awards shows, every environment became a stage where outsiders tried to read her body language as evidence of secret entanglements. Yet the solid timeline remains clear and finite compared to the mythology. In 2003, she married Kendu Isaacs, who also became her manager. For a while, the marriage looked like a shelter from earlier storms. She spoke about wanting a home life that felt safe, and she worked relentlessly, stacking Grammys and chart milestones while becoming the undisputed queen of hip-hop soul. But the partnership deteriorated over time. Their split began in 2016, and the divorce was finalized in 2018. The proceedings were painful in public, with financial disputes and accusations aired in court. Still, those claims should not be inflated into certainty about infidelity. They were part of a legal breakdown, not a verified scoreboard of lovers. What matters more is how Mary's emotional life kept shaping her artistic evolution. She became a master of singing from the inside of a bruise without ever romanticizing it. Albums like No More Drama, 2001, The Breakthrough, 2005, and Strength of a Woman, 2017, read like chapters of a long fight towards self-respect. She didn't just sing about romantic disappointment, she sang about self-betrayal, the hunger for acceptance, the cost of staying too long, and the slow courage of leaving. With age, the writing sharpened. The voice grew warmer, heavier, more lived in. That is the arc of someone who has walked through fire and learned which parts of herself are worth saving. Mary J. Blige is often placed in provocative conversations about desire because she never hid her need for love. But need is not the same as recklessness. Her story is rooted in resilience. A woman who stumbled, got back up, and taught millions of listeners how to do the same. If her music feels like your own life set to melody, that's because she made a career out of telling the truth, one hard, beautiful note at a time. Diana Ross. Diana Ross is a study in poise under pressure, a performer whose elegance often made people forget how hard-edged her climb really was. Born in Detroit in 1944, she came up in the same industrial grit that powered Motown itself. When she joined the Supremes in the early 1960s, the group was one of many hopeful acts circling Berry Gordy's hit factory. But Ross had a rare combination of qualities for that moment: a bright, instantly recognizable tone, a camera-ready bearing, and a fierce instinct for where the spotlight was moving next. By 1964, the Supremes were chart royalty, and Motown's machine increasingly placed Diana at the center, sometimes to the delight of audiences, sometimes to the frustration of her bandmates. That shift fueled decades of talk about how she gained influence. The verified record is straightforward. Diana and Motown founder Berry Gordy had a romantic relationship, and they share a daughter, Rhonda, born in 1971. The rest claims that she routinely used romance as a ladder or that she ran through a string of married executives belongs to the category of industry storytelling. Motown was a pressure cooker of ambition, long nights, and blurred boundaries. Observers often turned every private moment into a narrative of seduction or strategy. What is certain is that Ross understood power in entertainment the way few artists did. She studied how songs were chosen, how images were managed, and how careers were protected. Whether that made her calculating or simply professional depends on the lens you bring. Inside the Supremes, tension did grow. Mary Wilson and Florence Ballard were essential to the sound. Yet Motown's branding elevated Diana as the face. That imbalance led to real fractures, not because of romance, but because of hierarchy. In 1970, Ross left the group to launch a solo career, and the move was framed by some as inevitable stardom, by others as betrayal. Either way, she delivered. Her solo run opened with Ain't No Mountain High Enough, followed by a string of successes that proved she could carry a stage without the Supremes' harmonies beside her. She then leapt into film, earning an Academy Award nomination for Lady Sings the Blues, and later led cultural moments like Mahogany and The Wiz. Few R&B singers crossed so seamlessly into Hollywood while still dominating radio. Her personal timeline after Motown is well documented. She married music executive Robert Ellis Silberstein in 1971. They had two daughters, Tracy and Chudney, and divorced in 1977. In 1986, she married Norwegian businessman Arne Næss Jr. They had 3 children, and the marriage ended in 2000. Across those years, entertainment press constantly embroidered side stories, supposed flings with athletes, actors, princes, and peers. Some of those tales were self-serving publicity, others pure speculation. Ross has rarely dignified them with detailed rebuttal, choosing instead a boundary that protected her family and brand. What makes Diana Ross fascinating isn't a gossip tally. It's stamina and self-invention. She moved from teen group singer to global solo star, from Motown ingenue to fashion standard bearer, from pop chart force to living symbol of black glamour. She understood that in show business, perception can be as potent as vocal ability, and she learned to steer that perception rather than be consumed by it. If people still debate her private life, it's because her public life was so commanding that many couldn't accept talent and willpower as sufficient explanations. Yet the simplest truth holds Diana Ross didn't just ride Motown's wave, she helped shape the tide. Aretha Franklin. Aretha Franklin's story is already so dramatic and consequential that it doesn't need a single extra rumor to feel gripping. Born in Memphis in 1942 and raised in Detroit, she grew up inside the living pulse of black gospel. Her father, Reverend C.L. Franklin, was a famous preacher whose church welcomed a rotating cast of giants: Mahalia Jackson, Clara Ward, Sam Cooke. So Aretha learned early that music could be both sanctuary and battlefield. She began recording as a teenager, then crossed into secular soul in her early 20s, and by the late 1960s, she wasn't merely successful, she was symbolic. Respect, Chain of Fools, and You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman didn't just top charts, they became cultural signals for dignity, autonomy, and desire spoken in a woman's voice. Because her songs were so intimate, people tried to treat her as public property, and that pressure spilled into how outsiders narrated her romantic world. What's verified is that Aretha married young. At 19, she wed Ted White in 1961, a relationship that soon became turbulent. She later described elements of abuse and control, and the marriage effectively ended by 1968. In the middle of that strain, she kept performing, traveling, and recording, carrying motherhood alongside fame. She had 4 sons born between 1955 and 1970, and she guarded their privacy with ferocity. The public often interpreted that protectiveness as secrecy, yet it was also a deliberate boundary in a business that devoured women who showed vulnerability. When a star safeguards her home life, is it mystery or simply survival? After separating from White, Aretha's personal circle stayed private, but not empty. She had relationships that friends and biographers have acknowledged, including a long partnership with actor Glynn Turman in the early 1970s. She later married Turman in 1978, though that union ended in divorce in 1984. Beyond those confirmed bonds, the record becomes thinner, while gossip becomes louder. Stories about lists of lovers, hotel room escapades, or a constant parade of celebrity affairs thrive mostly because her fame invited projection. Yet there's no reliable documentation supporting a promiscuous caricature. Aretha rarely fed tabloids, and she resisted the era's demand that women explain themselves for having needs. Her refusal to perform confession in interviews left space for imagination to run wild. What we do know with certainty is how her emotional life intertwined with her artistry. She sang heartbreak with the authority of someone who understood it, yes, but also sang joy, stubborn hope, and self-possession. Her catalog is full of adult complexity, longing that doesn't beg desire, that doesn't apologize, faith that doesn't flinch. She battled industry exploitation, shifting labels, and periods of uneven commercial support, yet kept returning with records that reminded everyone who she was. By the 1980s, she reasserted herself again, collaborating with younger stars, winning new Grammys, and proving that a woman's voice can deepen, not diminish with age. In later years, Aretha became a national institution, not in a sanitized way, but in a way that honored her full size. She sang at presidential inaugurations, received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and remained the standard against which nearly every major soul vocalist is measured. Even then, she held her private world close. She understood that the public would always try to rewrite her into something simpler, either saintly gospel daughter or scandalous diva. She was neither. She was a whole human being, brilliant, complicated, sometimes wounded, always formidable. So, if this series must stay faithful to truth while addressing the title's theme, Aretha belongs here not because of confirmable excess, but because the industry treated her love life as spectacle whenever it suited their narrative. The enduring reality is larger. Aretha Franklin taught America what a woman's voice sounds like when it owns itself. That ownership, not rumor, was her real revolution. Janet Jackson. Janet Jackson's place in modern R&B and pop isn't just about chart power. It's about control of sound, image, and a private life the world has tried to claim since she was a teenager. Born in Gary, Indiana in 1966, She grew up in the most watched family in black entertainment. By the time she stepped forward as a solo artist, she carried two realities at once: a surname that opened doors and a spotlight that never turned off. From the start, her credibility was earned the hard way. She didn't become Janet through inheritance. She became Janet through Control 1986, an album that marked a public coming of age and a personal declaration of self-ownership. That hunger for autonomy also shaped her romantic timeline, which is far clearer in documented facts than in tabloid mythology. At 18, she eloped with singer James DeBarge in September 1984. The marriage unraveled quickly and was annulled about a year later. She has described that period as youthful, impulsive, and suffocating under family and media pressure. In 1991, she secretly married dancer and director Rene Elizondo Jr. Their relationship lasted through the 1990s, though the marriage remained private until their separation in 2000 and divorce finalized in the early 2000s. Unlike gossip narratives, this decade was not a carousel. It was a long, hidden partnership while she built an empire of albums like Janet. 1993 and The Velvet Rope. 1997, both of which explored sensuality and vulnerability with uncommon candor. After that marriage ended, Janet dated producer Jermaine Dupri from 2002 to 2009, a relationship both have openly acknowledged as serious and long-term. Then in 2012, she married Qatari businessman Wissam Al Mana. They welcomed a son, Isa, in January 2017 and separated later that same year. Since the divorce was finalized in 2018, she has largely kept her dating life out of public reach. Recent hand-holding rumors with Maxwell in 2025 were publicly downplayed as friendship reinforcing a pattern that defines her adulthood. She refuses to let curiosity dictate her story. The problem for Janet is that restraint has never protected her from invention. For decades, tabloids pushed a secret pregnancy narrative and a hidden child rumor linked to her first marriage. She has repeatedly denied that claim, and no credible evidence has ever supported it. After the 2004 Super Bowl incident, media coverage grew especially predatory, resurrecting every old allegation as if scandal were proof of character. Janet's response was not to perform innocence, but to retreat and rebuild. She didn't survive by explaining herself. She survived by continuing to create. What makes her romantic history relevant to your title isn't a confirmed pattern of excess. It's the way the industry and public projected one onto her because she combined erotic artistry with disciplined privacy. Janet Jackson has lived in full view for 40 years, yet her confirmed relationships can be counted on one hand. The enduring truth is simple. She is an artist who chose when to open the door and when to close it, and that choice, especially for a woman in her position, has always been radical. Patti LaBelle. Patti LaBelle's career feels like a hymn with sequins on it, equal parts church-bred power and showbiz sparkle. Born Patricia Louise Holte in Philadelphia in 1944, she started singing in neighborhood groups as a teen, carrying the kind of voice that doesn't ask for attention so much as command it. When she formed Patti LaBelle and the Bluebells, she learned the grind of the road, tiny stages, tight budgets, and audiences who expected perfection anyway. That apprenticeship shaped her into a performer who could hold any room, whether it was a smoky club or a televised gala. By the time the group reinvented itself as LaBelle in the early 1970s, Patti wasn't just a lead singer, she was a force of nature at the front of a cultural shift. LaBelle's futuristic costumes and fearless sound hit like a comet. Lady Marmalade 1974 wasn't only a smash, it was a boundary breaker, a record that made grown America blush and dance in the same breath. Patti's stage presence during that era was notorious for its intensity. She sang like a woman who had lived the lyric, then laughed like she dared anyone to judge her for it. Since LaBelle's brand leaned into adult sensuality and flamboyant liberation, the gossip press often treated their backstage world as a free-for-all. Stories swirled about after-show attachments, jealous flare-ups and romances that supposedly overlapped across tour corridors. Yet most of that talk lives in the haze of hearsay, not in firm documentation. What is solid is that relentless touring and creative pressure strained the trio's relationships, and by 1976, the group paused, letting Patti step into a solo path that would define the next 3 decades. Be honest, if an artist radiates desire on stage, do we sometimes assume her private life must be just as theatrical? Offstage, Patti's confirmed timeline is steadier than the myth. She married longtime manager Armstead Edwards in 1969, raised a son, and navigated fame alongside family responsibilities. The marriage eventually ended in the early 2000s after years of separation. Through all of it, Patti kept her romantic life mostly out of the publicity machine. She didn't build headlines from dating, nor did she lean on celebrity couples to stay visible. Instead, she worked constantly. Her solo breakthrough peaked in the 1980s with records like Winner in You and Be Yourself, and her voice aged like oak, richer, deeper, and more authoritative. She became the singer people called when they needed a finale that lifted the roof. That work ethic also explains how she evolved into a cross-generational household name. She conquered Broadway, lit up film roles, mentored younger artists, and even turned her culinary passion into best-selling cookbooks and a thriving food brand. These ventures weren't side hobbies. They were extensions of her personality, warm, bold, and unfiltered. When interviewers tried to steer her toward scandal, she usually redirected toward craft, faith, or family. That boundary frustrated tabloids, so they filled the space with invention-supposed tour flings, whispered same-sex relationships, and rivalries tied to unnamed lovers. None of those claims have ever solidified into reliable fact, and Patti herself has never confirmed such narratives. The public sees smoke and decides there must be fire. Sometimes it's only stage fog. Patti LaBelle belongs in conversations about promiscuity, chiefly because the culture has long weaponized female confidence, especially when it comes wrapped in sensual performance. But her true legacy is sturdier and far more inspiring, a woman who fused gospel roots with pop daring, who survived the churn of an industry that loves to mythologize women's bodies, and who kept rewriting her life on her own terms. If your audience remembers one thing, let it be: this, Patti's loudest love story, has always been the one she sings to the crowd night after night without apology. Donna Summer. Donna Summer's story is often reduced to disco glitter and late-night romance rumors, but the real arc is far more grounded and frankly more moving. Born Donna Adrienne Gaines in Boston in 1948, she grew up in a devout African Methodist Episcopal home where choir harmonies were as normal as Sunday dinner. That church training gave her a laser-pure vocal control and a sense of calling that never left her, even when fame tried to reshape her. In her late teens, she left for New York, then Europe, chasing stage work, not celebrity chaos. Germany became her turning point. She acted in musical theater, learned discipline, and met producers Giorgio Moroder and Pete Bellotte, the creative partnership that would ignite her international ascent. By 1975 to 79, Summer had become an architect of modern dance R&B crossover. Love to Love You, Baby, I Feel Love, and Last Dance weren't just hits. They shifted how rhythm records could sound lush, sensual, and electronically futuristic while still rooted in soul phrasing. She scored 4 Billboard Hot 100 #1 singles, earned 5 Grammys, and sold well over 100 million records worldwide. That scale of impact matters because it explains why her personal life drew outsized attention when a woman defines an era. The industry often writes a second story about her body to keep selling headlines. Here's what is actually documented. She married Austrian actor Helmut Sommer in 1973 and had her first daughter, Mimi, the same year. The marriage ended in divorce in 1976, but she kept an anglicized version of his surname as her stage name. In 1980, she married singer-songwriter Bruce Sudano, and they remained together until her death in 2012. They had 2 daughters, Brooklyn born 1981 and Amanda born 1982. These are not tabloid guesses. They are the publicly established facts of her family timeline. Summer's Promiscuous label comes mostly from the erotic tone of her early catalog. In the mid-1970s, breathy vocal arrangements and extended moans were treated by some commentators as proof of a wild private life. Yet Summer herself later explained that the sound was a studio concept guided by producers, not an autobiography. She was never publicly linked to a long string of verified affairs. Instead, the most dramatic shift in her adulthood was spiritual, not romantic. Around 1979-80, she experienced a born-again Christian conversion that caused real inner conflict about performing material she felt was too explicit. That tug between faith and fame is the core tension of her biography, replacing gossip with something deeper conscience. Through the 1980s and beyond, she pivoted. Albums like She Works Hard for the Money reframed her as a storyteller of working women's endurance, and her later projects leaned into gospel pop and adult soul. She also stepped away from the touring treadmill at intervals to raise her children and pursue painting, which she described as another form of prayer. If scandal was ever expected, stability is what she chose. Donna Summer didn't become a legend because of whispered hotel tales. She became one because her voice and vision expanded what black dance music could be, all while trying to stay true to her inner compass. When you tell her story, the truth is already compelling: a woman who sang desire like electricity, then insisted on being seen as more than desire alone. At Legends of Black Excellence, we honor these women first for the music voices that carried a people, an era, and a truth no headline can erase. Their private lives were often narrated by an industry that profits from mystery, especially when a black woman dares to sing desire out loud. Still, the line between documented history and recycled rumor matters. Here's the debate when we tell these stories. Are we exposing hidden realities or repeating stereotypes built to shrink black female freedom? Were they judged for choices or for refusing to be controlled? Comment below today.